What are you most afraid of? Maybe the dark or spiders? Or are you afraid of snakes? Or maybe you're afraid of enclosed spaces? One of the most common fears is the fear of depth. Imagine you're on the surface of the water. Below are several hundred meters of unknown darkness, a thick blue water. What is beneath you right now? Or who? You look down, but you can't even see your own body anymore. And at any moment, something can grab you again. In this video, I'll tell you several incredible stories of people who, without hesitation, descend to the bottom from the deepest underwater caves. They swim where no one has ever been, where sunlight hasn't reached for millions of years. What or who do divers find in the depths? And why do some of them stay there forever? In 2013, the Jesson 4 was a small tugboat navigating the Niger Delta, towing oil tankers. On May 26, the boat was doing its routine work. There were 12 crew members on board. After seeing off another oil tanker, the ship was heading back. At 5 a.m., a storm began. The vessel was tossed from side to side, and then a giant wave appeared in front of the tug. The force of the collision was so great that the ship flipped upside down. It lay in this position in 30 meters of water. The incident occurred approximately 40 kilometers from the coast. 12 crew members died instantly. The Dutch company DCN Diven immediately dispatched rescue ships and a helicopter to the scene. Rescuers located the wreck and marked it with buoys. They began pounding the ship's hull and lowered divers. No signs of life were found. 3 days later, the company that owned the ship hired a team of 6 deep-sea divers to recover the bodies of the sailors. The first group of 3 people set out to search for the dead. For over an hour, the team tried to pry open the doors, trying to get inside. The sight was horrific. Imagine a ship that has just sunk. Cabins that just a few hours ago were habitable. And then one of the divers, Nicoven Herden, crawled onto the main deck of the ship. He swam into the narrow, black corridor of the vessel, paused briefly to look around, and then felt something grab his shoulder. At a depth of 30 meters in the corridor of the recently sunken ship, he felt something touch him. What was it? The main and most interesting thing in this story is that the divers were filming everything that happened. And here is real footage from Nick Van Herden's camera during that dive. All right. Keep him. All right. "13 years. 29-year-old Harrison Jack Bocchini is a cook on the small tugboat DZN 4. Early morning. A man wakes up to go to the toilet. And who would have thought that this would save his life? The thing is, the ship was sailing in the Gulf of Guinea, where special safety regulations were in effect due to frequent pirate attacks. The crew of 12 was required to lock themselves in their cabins while sleeping. It was because of this rule that the rest of the sailors died instantly. They simply couldn't get out of their cabins. And Harrison was in the toilet at the time. He opens the door, and a wave immediately carries him into one of the cabins. He miraculously survived. The wave dragged him along the deck. I heard people screaming, felt the ship sinking, heard a voice saying, "Is this ship sinking or what?" I was in the toilet at the time, and the toilet fell on my head. Everything started falling on my head. My colleagues were screaming, "God, help me! God, help me! God, help me!" Quote. After a while, everything went quiet, and I didn't hear anything else. The cook was stuck in a bathroom, 1.5 by 15 meters long. The ship had already capsized, and the man was clinging to the sink. When the tugboat hit the bottom, Harrison found himself in an air pocket. A small room, with 30 meters of water above him. Everything around him calmed down, and now the man found himself completely alone and in complete darkness. For several hours, he simply clung to the sink, not knowing what to do. The situation was absolutely hopeless. And then he heard a knock. It was the same knock of the rescue vessel. They were trying to determine if anyone was alive, and Harrison knocked back. But they simply didn't hear him. The knocking stopped, and Harrison seemed to have lost all hope of rescue. After 24 hours, he decided to swim. Having a rough idea of where he was, he realized that the next room was probably the engineer's cabin, which meant there were flashlights and tools there. Harrison dives underwater and gropes his way to the next cabin. Here comes another incredible stroke of luck. Another air pocket. He can surface and breathe. It's about 1 meter high, meaning there's enough air for another couple of days. It's in this room that he will live out the 2 most terrifying days of his life. The ship is on the seabed, pitch darkness surrounds, and only the flashlight in Harrison's hand illuminates the cabin. Very quickly, he faces another problem. The water temperature at the bottom is very low. The first signs of hypothermia appear. He begins to shake. Something needs to be done. The cook tears the cabin paneling from the wall. He constructs a small seat for himself. It helps him stay afloat and at least partially climb out of the icy water. Harrison later recalled that the flashlights quickly went out, and he found himself in darkness again. He heard the ship grinding and large fish swimming near the hull, fighting each other, as he later assumed, for pieces of the bodies of the dead. Just imagine the state he was in. The seabed around him was nothing but water. The light had gone out. Sharks were eating his friends, and he could hear it. The man found a can of Coke in the cabin, the only thing he would drink for 3 days. And on the second day, the salt water began to pierce his tongue. According to Harrison, the only thing that kept him from going mad from the despair of fear was his faith. For almost the entire 3 days that he spent trapped underwater on the ocean floor, he never stopped praying. The third day, the man was going crazy, shaking from the cold, breathing hard. His thoughts were confused, he was praying constantly. Later, he recalled that at that moment, he mentally made a pact with God. He kept saying that if God saved his life, Harrison would never go to sea again. And it seemed a deal was struck. There was a knock. A sound unlike any before. It was the divers. They were exploring the ship. Harrison began pounding frantically on the walls, hoping to be heard. And then he saw a light. One of the divers swam straight down the corridor near the cabin. Harrison jumped into the water after him, hoping to be seen, but he didn't make it. The diver swam on, never noticing him. Harrison was literally a few meters from rescue. He surfaced again and continued to wait. And the diver swam back. Harrison dived again a second time, and this time he managed to catch the rescuer. The man called the diver to follow him into his rescue air pocket. Later, he told me that when the diver gave me water, he was watching me very carefully. The whole time, while he was looking at me, he was trying to figure out if I was really human. It was obvious that he was genuinely afraid. According to rescuers' calculations, the cook was pulled out just in time. The oxygen supply was expected to run out in a few hours. He was immediately given an oxygen mask. It would seem that the man was saved, but it's not that simple. He was at a depth of 30 meters. He couldn't be quickly lifted from the depths. It would be dangerous. A sudden rise could trigger an attack of sleep sickness in the exhausted man. The divers had to quickly figure out how to get him out. And after a couple of hours, they began the rescue operation. They warmed the survivor with hot water and taught him how to use diving equipment right there. They escorted him to the decompression chamber, which they used themselves. Only then was Harrison able to surface. The man was saved. Interestingly, when asked how long he had been underwater, he answered, 12 hours. Although in fact, it was 3 days. Of the 12 crew members, he was the only one brought out alive. What happened to him afterward? He returned to his hometown in Nigeria. The locals there are very superstitious and religious. After his miraculous rescue, many became convinced he was a sorcerer and had used black magic. That's why the man simply didn't attend the funerals of his colleagues. For a long time, he wondered, why him? He felt guilty that he was the only one who survived. He had constant nightmares. His wife said that her husband would wake up in the night screaming that he was underwater again. And remember his deal with God? He promised that if he survived, he wouldn't go to sea again. So, I found a video of him back on the boat. "30-year-old Jacob Chiles. A very experienced diver, but sometimes experience is not enough when you're battling the elements. Jacob and a small group were supposed to jump into the sea from the boat, but things didn't go quite according to plan. Here's his quote: "We couldn't drop anchor for a long time, and when we finally did, several divers were at different stages of readiness to dive. I was one of the first to jump into the water, and the last of the group didn't enter until about 15 minutes later. We were battling the current the entire time. Then we started descending along the anchor line. One diver was on top. I tried to switch places and lost my grip. When I surfaced, I was drifting along the side of our yacht. There was no tow line, so I had nothing to grab onto. By the time the captain threw me one, I had already drifted too far." While preparing to dive, Jacob was swept out to sea by the current. Then Jacob found himself alone in the water. There was nothing on the horizon. And what's remarkable about this story is that Jacob, while out at sea, also turned on his camera. Many boats were immediately dispatched to search for Jacob, but he didn't see a single one. He saw search helicopters circling nearby, but they simply didn't notice him. This video could have been Jacob's last, but at 5:30 p.m., searchers spotted him from the air, and half an hour later, he boarded a marine police boat. He was rescued just after sunset. According to the officer in charge of the rescue operation, Jacob saved himself. He managed to remain calm and position a marker buoy so that he could be more easily spotted. He did everything exactly as he was supposed to. And this experience did not discourage Jacob from diving. "I will dive again, and probably tomorrow." The end of the DxO. Tennessee. Ben McDaniel, the eldest of 3 sons born to Shelby and Patty McDaniel, is the son of wealthy parents. But things are going terribly for him. He moved back in with his parents after divorcing his wife. His construction business collapsed, and now he owes $50,000 in taxes. And in 2008, his younger brother, 22-year-old Paul, passed away. Ben found Paul unconscious at home. He tried to revive him and took him to the hospital, but they couldn't save his life. At first, they thought his younger brother had died of a stroke, but it was later determined that he died from an incorrect combination of drugs, in simple terms, an overdose. Ben was in mourning, and then his parents suggested he take what they called a sabbatical. He took his chocolate Labrador and went to live at his parents' house in Florida on the Santa Rosa Beach coast. He moved into this house in April 2010. The move allowed Ben to pursue his favorite hobby, scuba diving. He first took up scuba diving at the age of 15. He trained with scuba gear in the family pool. Now Ben dived at Vortex SPRN's, the largest diving center in the state. The most experienced divers come here to see the local underwater cave, which begins at a depth of 20 meters. The cave is dangerous. All divers must sign a liability release. The main attraction of Vortex SPRN is the cave, which begins at a depth of 90 meters. At the entrance to this cave, at the bottom, is the now famous plaque. It depicts death itself, warning divers of the danger. The entrance to this cave is locked with a grate and a key. The center will not issue a key to the gate until the diver has shown a cave diving certificate, which requires 2 months of training. Each diver must also complete 125 dives with an instructor. All this indicates that this place is extremely dangerous. In the 1990s, a group of 13 divers died here. The full extent of the cave remains unknown. In some places, the passage narrows to 30 centimeters, meaning divers have to remove their tanks and drag them along. Ben dived in this spot very often. Regulars and dive center staff already recognized him. But Ben always dived alone. Why is that? Some said he was overconfident and even a little narcissistic. People simply didn't want to dive with him. But his father said Ben was fearless. He followed his passions. Mid-August 2010, 4 months after moving to Florida, Ben returned to his parents. He decided to visit them for a week. His parents noticed that he looked cheerful and confident. At the time, Ben was working on his instructor certification. He had a new girlfriend, Emily Greek. He often told her about his plans to start a diving business. On August 15th, Ben returned to Florida and left a letter for his parents. He thanks them for the vacation and promises to take care of them when they grow old. On August 18th, he heads back to the SPRN Vortex. In the middle of the day, he makes one dive. Other divers visiting the center noticed him pacing the area and examining something very intently, as if he were preparing for some serious dive. According to a witness, he spent the entire evening preparing his equipment. That evening, he called his mother on his cell phone. This was their last conversation. 7:30 p.m. As the sun sets, Ben dives into the water. This was witnessed by 2 local divers, Cronin and Eduarda Terran. They made the dive every Wednesday. On the way back, they encountered Ben and noticed him trying to open the cave gate, the very same lock near the sign with death. Eduarda Terran had already seen him try this, but this time the 2 divers make a very strange decision. They open the gate for him. Why did they do this? It is unclear. Later, they made excuses, saying it would be better for him to save time and just squeeze through the fence rather than waste oxygen or get stuck in the fence. But perhaps this was sheer negligence. What will happen to him? I'll open the door for him. Ben swims into the cave, and his two partners surface. Then comes another strange coincidence. Usually, when these two saw Ben swim underwater at night, they would stay by the spring to watch him resurface, just in case. But that evening, the divers didn't check on Ben, they simply went out for coffee. Perhaps a second act of negligence. Morning came. A huge number of new visitors arrived, but over time, the center's staff noticed a car at the entrance. It was Ben's pickup truck. Right where he left it. So he hadn't left. They started looking for the guy and realized he was nowhere to be found. The last two witnesses hadn't seen him resurface either. So he hadn't left the cave. Ben was gone. The police were immediately called. The sheriff ordered the entire downtown area cordoned off. They searched the car. There were no tanks, wetsuits, or other diving equipment. No signs of a struggle, no traces. His cell phone and $1,100 were also found in the car. The police went to Ben's home. His dog, a chocolate Labrador, was found there. The dog was clearly hungry. It hadn't been fed for the last 24 hours. Everything pointed to Ben remaining in the cave. They called in sniffer dogs, and the dogs scented Ben on the surface of the water. Word quickly spread throughout the area that a diver was missing in Vortex Spring Cave. A huge number of professional divers volunteered to participate in the rescue operation. The police also informed Ben's parents and girlfriend that he was missing. Experienced divers began to explore the cave. They examined every crevice, every fissure that Ben might have fallen into in a panic. The cave was indeed very dangerous. Divers explored it for several days. One of them even said they nearly died during the search. But for several days, not a single diver saw a single trace. The only thing found was Ben's gear at the cave entrance. 3 tanks, which had been left at the gate. Divers often place extra air tanks at points along the way to the exit. But strangely, these tanks contained regular air, not a special gas mixture, as expected. The tanks, of course, were not used. By Sunday, August 22nd, no other trace of Ben had been found. Local divers said they simply didn't know where else to look. Moreover, every dive is very dangerous. Then the parents sent a message to Ed Sorensen. An experienced caver and rescue specialist, Ed had 2,500 dives to his credit at the time. He is one of the most experienced cavers in the world. The TMB Times described Sorensen as a man capable of going where other divers couldn't. He arrived the very next day and immediately began searching. That day, he made 3 separate dives, covering half a kilometer into the cave. He went 50 meters beyond the areas marked on Ben's map. For a full day, one of the world's most experienced divers explored the cave and found nothing. No body, no sign of his presence. There was no increased scavenging activity, no signs of Ben's having entered. No tracks on the cave walls, nothing at all. It was as if he had simply never been there. The last spot I searched was untouched, with no sign of a diver. There was no way to get through that barrier without leaving some kind of footprint on the floor or ceiling. He wasn't there. The parents hired Steve Keen, who mapped the cave in 2003. No one knew these caves better than him. Steve completed 7 dives and then apologized to the parents, saying he had found nothing, not a single trace of Ben. If he was there, I didn't know where he could be. The police then brought in a specialized underwater robot to check even narrower caves, where even divers couldn't get, but to no avail. A total of 16 divers spent 36 days searching for Ben's body, with absolutely no results. The search lasted from spring until November. The unit's dogs searched the woods around Vortex Spring, also to no avail. A helicopter flew over the entire surrounding area. Nothing. And most importantly, over the course of several months, 30 different water tests were conducted, and it was determined that there were no signs of increased bacterial counts that would indicate the presence of a decomposing human body. In other words, the man had simply disappeared. And then many divers began to doubt that Ben had even gone there. It was suggested that Ben's body had been pulled from the water before the search began. Who and why? The last witnesses, Cronin and Eduard Terran, were questioned. Both were given lie detector tests. They told the truth. The only thing that could be said here is that the father was very critical of the police and the way they were tested. Because the men were only asked 3 questions in total, although a session usually lasts an hour. Then it was suggested that he had taken his own life. He owed a large sum of money, had a dead younger brother, and was divorcing his wife. But in that case, questions still remain. Where is his body, and why did he leave the dog unfed? One of the last 2 witnesses, Cronin, claimed that the guy had faked his death to get rid of his tax debts. But in that case, why didn't he take the money left in the car? By this point, the parents were becoming increasingly convinced that Ben hadn't died a natural death. It was all too strange. Where was the body? Why were the 2 divers out for coffee? Why did they open the gate for him? Some of the center's employees said Ben had often teased one of the divers before. That meant they had a conflict. When journalists began digging deeper, they uncovered another interesting story related to the center. The owner of the SPRH had already been charged with criminal offenses. The case alleged that one of the employees owed him a large sum of money. The man then took him into the woods and beat him to get the money back. The man escaped, and prosecutors later charged Kelly with assault and kidnapping. He was ultimately fined and placed on probation. But the man didn't live to see the end of his probation. He died earlier, also in a very mysterious way. Kelly is said to have fallen down a flight of stairs and sustained a head injury. Then one of the guests drove him home, helped him shower, covered him with a blanket, and left him there to sleep. In the morning, it was discovered that Kelly's condition had worsened. He was taken to the hospital, where he died. The local sheriff hinted that he still doesn't believe what happened, and the investigation is ongoing. Furthermore, who exactly drove him home has not been specified. By 2011, his parents were almost certain that their son's death was staged, possibly to cover up a crime. It's also possible that he was found dead by the center's employees, who for some reason hid his body, fearing repercussions. The parents hired private investigator Lynn Marie Carty. She discovered that other people associated with the VKSPN Center also had criminal records. There are as many reasons to look for Ben's body above water as below in the cave. There are also very puzzling indications that on the day Ben disappeared, a wild-eyed man, likely drunk, came into the center's store. He asked the workers if it was too late to dive. It was never possible to find out who the man was. Where Ben disappeared to is unknown. If he drowned in the cave, where is his body, and why did lab tests show no signs of a human body? Why did the last 2 divers who saw Ben open the door for him? Why did they leave early? Why were they so easily and simply tested with a lie detector? There are so many unanswered questions. What do you think? Please tell us in the comments. Where did B disappear to? Was it an ordinary accident or a true crime mystery? A diver's graveyard. That's the nickname given to the enormous underwater cavern Blue Hole in the Red Sea near the Egyptian city of Doha. Nearly 200 divers have died there. The shore is dotted with numerous memorial plaques commemorating the departed divers. In fact, There were so many plaques that at one point, authorities banned the installation of new ones, so as not to scare away tourists. Blue Hole is approximately 130 meters deep, and bodies are still lying on the bottom. This means that divers who reach the bottom can encounter them. One of the most famous and horrific examples of a diver's death in this spot is that of Russian diver Yuri Lipsky. He was filming his entire dive, and at a depth of 80 meters, he developed nitrogen toxicity. He could no longer control his body, his movements became uncoordinated, he began to lose consciousness. His body, along with the camera, was recovered from the bottom, as the video literally showed a person dying. Unfortunately, I can only post this on my Telegram channel. Follow the link in the description. Deon Dreyer, a 20-year-old South African scuba diving enthusiast, grew up near Johannesburg. Besides diving, he enjoyed hunting, racing powerful cars and motorcycles, and building obscenely loud car stereos. Basically, a typical 20-year-old. But even by the age of 20, he had already completed about 200 dives. And then he was invited to join several divers at the Cave Diving Association. He was offered a dive in Bushman's Hole. The depth of this place is 283 meters. Very few people can reach the bottom. They planned a descent of 150 meters and asked Deon to spot them. The guy was very excited by this offer and agreed. A very dangerous and very serious descent. And on October 17, 1994, they made the descent. The group prepared, conducted a briefing, checked all the equipment, and several divers, along with Tun, descended into the water. At first, everything went well, the divers descended deeper and deeper. It became increasingly dark around. Bushman's Hole is one of those places where the sun's rays never penetrated. It was as if they were descending into a completely different world. Then, at 48 meters, the other divers noticed Deon motionlessly descending faster than everyone else. He wasn't responding to signals. He was simply falling into the abyss. All the other divers saw was his light disappearing into the darkness. No one could swim after him. No one was prepared to descend to 283 meters. The depth was too dangerous. The group immediately surfaced. What happened to Deon, no one knows. It was suspected that it was nitrogen toxicity again. Rescuers began searching for a body, but only a handful of people on the planet could descend to that depth. So they used a small submarine to explore the cave floor. The only thing the submarine was able to find was a helmet. It didn't find a body at the bottom of Bushman's Hole. Many years passed. Deon's parents erected a memorial plaque at the entrance to Bushman's Hole. Rescuers assumed it was an accident during an extreme descent, and Deon's body remained at a depth of almost 300 meters for 10 long years. October 28, 2004. David John Shaw, a 50-year-old Australian scuba diver and former airline pilot. An incredibly experienced diver, one of the best on the planet. On October 28, 2004, David planned a descent of 270 meters, and Bushman's Hole turned out to be the perfect place to carry it out. That day, David broke 4 world records. But that wasn't the only remarkable event that day. When David reached the bottom of the cave, he decided to take a look around. The lone diver in complete darkness, at an incredible depth and from where he couldn't even be rescued, pointed his flashlight at something terrifying. He swam closer and saw a person, or rather, the remains of a person, fully equipped, with tanks and the necessary equipment. The body was lying on its back, with a mask over its head. There was no skin on the face. David marked the spot and began the ascent. David surfaced at 8 a.m. It's a very long, difficult process, as I've already mentioned. Only after 8 hours did he see people on the surface and immediately told them, "There's a man down there. It's Dion Driver." Quote. And then David had an idea. He met with Dion's parents and said he could retrieve their son's body if they wanted. The parents agreed. Preparations began for an incredible operation. In principle, only dozens of people from all over the planet could have descended to such a depth. And now he's not just breaking records, he's also retrieving a human body. A very technically challenging task. They developed a recovery plan and assembled a huge team of almost 30 people. David's wife made a special bag in which to place the body so that it wouldn't crumble. Incidentally, his wife had never been present during her husband's descents. She was very worried. They both realized that every descent was too dangerous, and that it could be their last. They even had a special protocol. If anything happened to David, he asked a priest he knew to tell his wife. The priest was to be the first to contact her. David recruited Don Shirley, his longtime partner, to assist him. Together, they had completed several dozen dives. They also invited Gordon Hayes, a director who wanted to make a documentary about the dive. They built a special helmet to which they attached a camera, and this, by the way, is a very complex design, considering what year it was. David and Don Shirley decided to perfect all their moves. They held a rehearsal. Don, wearing his diving gear, lay on the lake bottom. David swam to him and tried to put on the bag. They estimated that the entire process would take 6 minutes. Then the plan was as follows. David would attach the bag to the safety rope, then attach Dion's equipment, and begin the ascent. Then, at a depth of 220 meters, David will have to hand over the bag with the body to his partner, Don Shirley. Shirley will hand the body to the next diver at a depth of 170 meters, who will then hand it over to the next diver at a depth of 120 meters. In this way, the body should reach the surface within an hour of the start of the dive. The divers themselves will continue to ascend for many more hours. A group of 25 people is working on land. Also on land is a decompression chamber and doctors. On January 8, 2005, everything was ready for the descent. Before the dive, Don Shirley asked David, "If something happens to you, should I go down to help you?" David replied that if he needed help, he would signal with a flashlight. Also before the dive, both divers agreed that if something went wrong, their bodies should not be recovered. At 6 a.m., David said to Don, "See you in 20 minutes." And he was the first to dive into the water. His partner, Dom, followed 13 minutes later. Everyone froze in anticipation. The divers descended into the water one by one at the appointed time. On the shore, the parents waited for their son's body. The appointed 70 minutes passed, but no one surfaced. 75 to 80 minutes. No body, no divers. Then the two divers who had been waiting at the surface surfaced. No one had come to them. Another hour passed. No one. 2 hours later, two more men surfaced. One of them was holding a sign. The thing is, at depth, divers communicate using signs. It's simply impossible to exchange information there any other way. The sign reads, "Didn't meet D+D, waited 6 minutes at 150 meters." Not sure if D's light was turned off. When the group saw this sign, everyone immediately realized that, most likely, David and Don would not rise again. But they were wrong. One of the divers decided to go to help. He dives after Don and David. And 12 hours later, Don, David's partner, surfaces. He also has a sign in his hand. It has 3 words on it. Dave will not return. That day, a few hours later, the doorbell rang at David's wife's house. She met a priest on the threshold. Don spends several hours in a pressure chamber, then spends 2 weeks in the hospital. And only a month later he comes to. Only a month later he could tell what happened. And this is what he saw. At the appointed time, he descends to the required depth. Everything was calculated so that when he descends, David should just rise to him towards him. But no one came to him. He waited at his depth for a few minutes and noticed David's flashlight 50 meters below, at the very bottom of the cave. And the flashlight wasn't moving. Don decides to swim to help. He's never descended to such a depth. This is his first dive. 240 meters, 260. David's flashlight still isn't moving, and then, at a depth of 273 meters, he hears a very loud sound, a bang. He realizes that due to the extreme pressure at such a depth, the oxygen supply regulator has broken. Now he himself is in mortal danger. He must manually change the oxygen concentration in the mask. He can't go down, much less help anyone. He began to ascend. During the long hours of ascent, he was in a terrible state. At some point, he simply didn't understand what was happening. He lost consciousness and felt dizzy. He was constantly nauseous, and at a depth of 50 he finally saw the light of a torch, the diver who had dived to his aid. This probably saved his life. He continued to ascend for many more hours, but now under the supervision of others. At that point, no one knew what had happened to David, but everyone understood that he would most likely not ascend again. The operation had completely failed. For several days, the group collected equipment at the entrance to Bush Manhole. They began to pull safety lines from the water. And only then, several days after the dive, did they notice a person. One of the group members immediately dove to see what it was. It turned out to be two bodies. Apparently, David had snagged the safety lines at the very depths. And when they were being pulled back up a few days later, David surfaced. Yes, it was the body of David Shaw. And next to him was the body of Dion. They were immediately pulled from the water and saw a camera attached to David's helmet. Now they could see with their own eyes what had happened at the depths. 6 a.m., the moment of the dive. David descends underwater. At the bottom of the cave, he steps away from the rope and finds Dion's body. He immediately begins to stuff it into the bag. But something goes wrong. His hands are shaking from the incredible pressure. He tries to stuff the body into the bag, but it doesn't work. Visibility is poor. He takes out a pair of scissors, apparently tangled on something. He keeps checking the time. The silt at the bottom rises, and he can't see anything. Then his flashlight gets caught on the rope and, apparently, begins to lose consciousness. David turned out to be one of those who filmed his own death. He simply couldn't cope with the depth. The incredible pressure killed him. Nevertheless, David kept his promise. He sacrificed his life to bring Dion's body to the surface. Of course, David knew the risks he was taking. He was perfectly aware of the dangers he was doing. But nevertheless, he continued doing what he was doing. Friends, take care of yourselves, like this video. And soon a new story.